Hey there, and welcome. I'm Anna Hartman, and this is Unreal Results, a podcast where I help you get better outcomes and gain the confidence that you can help anyone, even the most complex cases. Join me as I teach about the influence of the visceral organs and the nervous system on movement, pain, and injuries, all while shifting the paradigm of what whole body assessment and treatment really looks like. I'm glad you're here. Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Unreal Results podcast. I was thinking about what to talk about today. And, I always sort of rely on a little bit of what's coming up in my own practice. And also just kind of sticking with the theme of the summer short podcast snacks. And also leaning in the visceral thing. So I was wanting to talk about the Tentorium. And of course, what I always do for my podcast episodes when I have an idea is in my brain, I'm like, I don't know if it's I doubt myself or what, but I think it's not doubting myself. It's I want to make sure when I provide information to you, it's accurate and not just semi-accurate based on how I am using it in my head, if that makes sense. So I always go back to the textbooks from the courses that I learned the information in. So when it comes to the Tentorium, you learn about the Tentorium in the first neuromanipulation class from the Barral Institute, which is NM1. It is one of my favorite classes of theirs. It is one of the classes that I use probably the techniques from the most. So, I'm never telling everybody go take this course, but also this is a great course. Plus, we've talked about in previous episodes, and I'll have Joe maybe link those in the show notes. I think one was talking about the difference between the autonomic nervous system and the central nervous system, or how to differentiate the two. Talked a little bit about just accessing the parasympathetic nervous system without breathing. So anytime we talk about the nervous system, and even within the LTAP, when we get to this step where we're identifying if there is any central nervous system tension patterns or not, it really highlights that in the professions of physical therapy and athletic training, we often don't have a lot of skills around assessing and treating this area of the body unless you've taken courses like craniosacral, these neuromanipulation courses. What other things that could be it? Functional neurology courses, craniofacial technique. It's getting more popular out there. Myofascial release, like the Barnes method, has a cranial based one too. So it's unless you've taken these courses outside of traditional work, as far as our traditional orthopedic training, we don't really cover it. And so I'm maybe if you're a pediatric physical therapist, or maybe if you're a neuro-based physical therapist, you have a little bit more skills around this. The vestibular therapist might have some more skills around this, but it's still a huge blind spot in most of our practice. This is why I end up putting a lot of I don't want to say a lot of products, but it's why I have some products out there to support you in this, right? So it's and I'll have Joe link these in the show notes too, but the Reset Your Nervous System regen session, really simple ways that we can affect the central nervous system. I have a little mini course which takes that regen session and provides the clinical reasoning throughout it. Inside the mentorship program that's upcoming, we spend a whole module talking about the autonomic nervous system and the cranial nerves. We have, what else do I have in that aspect. The podcast episodes, I think those are the things, really. Those regen sessions, the clinical reasoning course, in my go-to treatments mini course as well, or PDF, some of you got in this last launch. That also has some central nervous system treatments too. Oh, the podcast episode I was thinking that I'll have Joe link in the show notes was the episode on the trigeminal nerve, because what comes out when you start learning about the tentorium is how much the trigeminal nerve influences it, or vice versa, how much the tentorium influences the trigeminal nerve. And so the trigeminal nerve ends up being a really powerful way to treat the tentorium, treat the central nervous system and the tensions. Now, all this to tell you, this episode actually, I decided is not going to be on the tentorium because I don't want it to be too long, and I need to gather more thoughts on how I want to approach it. But why I led with this is because this is where the episode is going, is because as I was reading more about the Tentorium, which is in this book that they use for that NM1 class, the book is called Trauma: An Osteopathic Approach. It's co-authored by Jean-Pierre Burrell as well as Alain Crobier, which is one of the other main creators, main teachers in the Burrell Institute classes. This is a packed full book. And often when you see a book called Trauma, I think most of us, when we think of trauma, we think of maybe psychological trauma. We maybe think of physical and psychological trauma together. We don't think of trauma as just what happens when the body when the body is impacted by forces. And that's really what this book is about: mechanical trauma and the effect of mechanical trauma on the body, specifically on the central nervous system and all the supporting containers of the central nervous system. And so when I was reading about the tentorium, one of the things that really stood out to me was this sentence, actually. This is consequences for the vertebral axis. It says spinal functions are usually listed in the following order: stability, mobility, and protection of contents. And I loved seeing that because we've been talking lately a lot about container versus contents. And that's really how I look at my assessment and treatment within the LTAP, and within when I'm working with my athletes. So that really hit home. And then this next sentence, they said, we believe that the spine is first and foremost an organ of protection to which the other functions are secondary. And this again aligns with this whole point of this podcast. This whole point of what I'm teaching is that the musculoskeletal system, one of the main roles of it is to protect the organism. And fundamentally, by protecting the organism, it's this idea of protecting the important vital organs of the organism, right? And then it says all vertebral mechanics are organized for protection of its precious contents. And when we look at, especially when we look at how the central nervous system and the meninges are connected to the spine, we see this beautiful design of all these checkpoints of force distribution throughout the dura to allow movement of the spinal cord, transmission of information through the spinal cord, and also it makes you think about how all of these forces within the spine, how they're constantly downwardly pulling basically at the brain. And so what prevents all this tension from our spine being a mover, our spine being protector, from not getting translated to the brain itself in this brainstem. And so this was what brings us back to this beautiful anatomical structure of the tentorium, and how the tentorium is designed to redistribute forces, equalize the forces from the rest of the body to make sure the brain is like as undisturbed as possible so it can function well. Now, like I said, I don't want this episode to be about the tentorium, but maybe it's like a little sneak peek about a future episode about the tentorium, I guess. But why I was like, you know what? I just think I want to talk about the spine. And because this other, well, that whole paragraph kind of threw me for a loop, only because it hammers home how important spine function and spine mobility is, not only for movement, but for the health of the organs, the health of the central nervous system, and the health of our autonomic nervous system, and protection or the ability to thrive for the whole organism. And it reminded me previously, before I got into the world of osteopathic medicine through the Brawl Institute, the thing that I had dove into before that was Pilates. I went through the Pulsar Pilates rehabilitation certification. And one of my favorite quotes from Joseph Pilates that I always saw to be true once I started applying it with my patients and in my own body. Joseph Pilates has this famous quote that is basically like, if your spine is inflexibly stiff at 30, you're old. On the flip side, if your spine is super flexible at 60, you're young. So he talks about this vitality. One of Joseph Pilates' first book was all about like vitality in life and vitality and feeling good, operating well, like really running on all cylinders. And this vitality, he really believed, was achievable through maintaining spine mobility and also integrating breath into movement. And when you think about that from this perspective, he was so right. And when I look in the world of rehab, we talk a lot about in the world of physical therapy and athletic training and like traditional clinical physical rehab, the outcomes are bleak, to be honest. The outcomes are mediocre at best. Like 6 to 7 out of 10 patients maybe get better. And it takes them 8 to 12 weeks, if not longer. And that mediocrity, what happens is a lot of patients actually get lost along the way. They just stop going. Because people in general, like, why would you continue to do something if you're not seeing the results, right? And so they leave their clinical regimented rehab, whether it's with an athletic trainer or whether it's with a physical therapist, and they seek other care. And the care that they often seek is with the chiropractor, or they go to Pilates. And you'll hear over and over from those patients of basically stories of, I failed rehab at a physical therapy clinic, or I went to see my athletic trainer and they couldn't help me, or a combination of those two, honestly, for a lot of my athletes. And they'll say, but I started doing Pilates and then everything felt better. Or I started going to the chiropractor and I started finally feeling better. Or some other scenarios, I started doing yoga and I started feeling better, depending on the type of yoga. Because some yoga is very much like Pilates in that it emphasizes spinal mobility over everything. And that's the other thing that chiropractors do really well is they emphasize and treat via the spine. And when we start to treat via the spine, we start changing these little micro adhesions throughout the spinal dura, throughout the dentate ligaments, and we allow for improved cerebral spinal flow, decreased tension in the vertebrae, also a viscerosomatic effect to the organs. So sometimes the organs now have improved sympathetic flow to them from changing the input neurally at the spine. So the organs may start functioning better. And then this protective mechanism starts to improve, right? The spine, this somatic reflex loop gets improved. So the tone around the spine changes, which further changes the mechanics and the tension at the dentate ligaments, the tension at the posterior longitudinal ligament of the spine, the tension at the dura, the sensory information at the little sinuvertebral nerves. And then this is reflected in a change of tension in the cranium. And when we have a change of tension in the cranium, we start affecting the reticular formation at the brainstem, which automatically is going to change our autonomic nervous system state, which is going to facilitate a more healing response. And when we're in that more parasympathetic response, we're going to be functioning better, feeling better, decreased sensitivity, improved movement, right? And so it has this reflexive effect. And this is what I wanted to say, right? Like, I was like, I don't need a whole episode to say this, but to reiterate, if you're not looking at the spine outside of its first step of stability, right? That first sentence I just read you from this book. If you're not moving on to the next piece, the mobility piece, you're missing a lot. I often get asked from my athletes, or even just from other clinicians, or like in speaking engagement things, is like, if there was like one thing I could have everybody do, what would it be? And that is it. It's like, improve your sensory information by giving more life to your feet, but then also improve everything by improving your spinal mobility, doing segmental spine mobility. Hands down, it's one of the most common exercises I prescribe to people, is like a spinal roll down, a segmental cat-cow, ragdoll, Da Vinci rolling, all of these things that when you break it down are different ways and different planes of movement for segmental spine mobility. And then I even too, like this past spring, I taught a beta version of the LTAP level 2. And what filtered out of it was like this importance of continuing to dial in our assessment and treatment to the container. And so we spent a lot of time going over spinal mechanics and how to assess spinal mechanics, how to treat the spine in a really powerful way to both influence the viscera, but also always it is part of the central nervous system. So you're also influencing the central nervous system. And therefore, you're also influencing the peripheral neurovascular system. And so it's just a very good reminder that you have likely a lot of skills already that treats the spine through movement, through manual therapy, through assessment. You're just maybe skipping it. And if I could go back 20 something years in my career, one of the first things that like I was most uncomfortable about as a new grad was a spine assessment. You don't graduate from school knowing a good spine assessment. If you do now, congratulations. We didn't back then. But from what I see in my classes, all the practitioners that come through my doors, the various ones, right? This is not just PTs. This is not just athletic trainers. This is not just chiropractors. This is everybody, right? And then also, yeah, of course, it's massage therapists and Pilates teachers and yoga teachers. because you're not getting any of that education, right? It's all going to be brand new to you, potentially. But it's like, yeah, it actually is those harder pieces, right? Sometimes we skip learning the hard stuff and doing the hard stuff over and over again because it feels uncomfortable. And so we seek these courses, we seek these classes with these fancy treatment techniques using different tools or different modalities or different exercises, when if we just got really good at understanding spinal mechanics and spinal movement and the value of moving through the spine versus stabilizing the spine, I think we would be better off for all these wonderful reasons of how it connects to the central nervous system, how it connects to the viscera, and how it actually connects to this fundamental understanding that the spine, at the end of the day, is our protector. And when it is not moving well, it means that we are stuck in this protection pattern. And the way that we get unstuck in a protection pattern is to meet us where we are and then move in that space and around that space and sort of slowly open up the things. And this is like, again, like going back to this movement science piece, and the segmental spine piece was just like so powerful to understand that, like, I got really good results when I started adding in segmental spine mobility because it is so dang powerful. So that's it for now. Hope you enjoy this food for thought all about spine mobility. And sure, Joe will link in some tutorials that I mentioned too. So have a great day. We'll see you next week.